God's Adventurer, Chapter 3, You're a Dead Man. Mrs. Finch, Hudson's landlady in Drainside, was married to a sailor who, as is the way with sailors, was usually at sea. His wife had a hard time making ends meet on a small allowance, and very glad she was to have the doctor's young assistant paying even a little money for the use of her front room. That was all she had to pay for the rent of the whole house, and as it gave no trouble, she considered herself very fortunate to have him. Her lodgers were not usually such respectable, considerate young gentlemen as this one, and when one day he broke the news to her that he would be leaving, she was genuinely distressed. "I'm going to London to attend a medical course in the London hospital," he explained. "Well, sir, very sorry I'll be to lose you," she said. "You're going to London?" That gave her an idea. "I wonder if you would do something for me while you're there," she asked. Certainly he would if he could. Then she explained half of her husband's pay was sent to her from the shipping office in London each month, and a charge was made for sending it. If Mr. Taylor would kindly collect the money from the offices and send it to her instead, he would save her quite a lot of money. Hudson, of course, readily agreed to this, although once he got to London he discovered it involved a long walk in the middle of the day in order to keep his promises. Since he had a 4-mile walk from his boarding house to the hospital each morning and a 4-mile walk back to each evening, he was scarcely in need of any more exercise. This move to London to take a medical course was a big thing to him. He was already in touch with a very small mission called the Chinese Evangelization Society, which was prepared to send him to China as a missionary, and with the approval of this society, he was now starting out on further medical training. It was as definite a step towards China as the move to Hull had been, and had been taken at a risk of which he spoke to no one. The risk was again along the lines of testing his own faith, and his own ability to endure hardships. His father had offered to supply him with the money necessary to live in London and take the medical course. The Chinese Evangelization Society had made a similar offer. After thinking the matter over, however, and praying about it too, he decided to accept neither. He thanked his father and said that he would not need his help, and his father naturally thought he was receiving his support from the Missionary Society. He thanked the Board of Missionary Society and said he would not be needing their help, and they thought he was receiving his support from his father. He arrived in London one very foggy day with the few pounds he had saved, not knowing what would happen when they were spent. He was determined to learn to trust God to meet his needs as they arose. At the same time, he felt he must live as economically as possible. It had been arranged that he should share an attic bedroom in Soho with a cousin of his, and this he was glad to do. Far better to live with a friendly relative than be entirely alone in the great city. He bought his own food and was very economical. He spent as little as he possibly could. After a few experiments, he decided that brown bread and apples with clear cold water was the most inexpensive diet he could find. So on his way to the hospital, he bought a pound of apples for his dinner, and on his way back, passing warm-looking restaurants from which drifted out the most mouth-watering smells, he called in at a baker's shop and bought a brown loaf. "Will you cut it in half, please?" he asked the baker, and with the 2 halves under his arm, he continued his long walk home and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his room. 1 half of the loaf provided him with his supper, and the other half was resolutely put aside for breakfast, however hungry he felt. "No, my health does not suffer," he wrote to reassure his mother, who was anxious about him. Was he getting proper food, she wondered. Had she known? On the contrary, everyone says how well I look, and some even that I am getting fat, though this, honesty compelled him to add, can only be perceived by rather a brilliant imagination. About 3 months after his arrival in London, he received an urgent letter from Mrs. Finch. Would he, she requested, be so kind as to draw her allowance for her as soon as possible? Her rent was nearly due, and she had no other money with which to pay it. The request had come at an awkward time for Hudson, for he was studying hard for an examination and spent every spare minute over his books. Rather than take the time to go all the way to Cheapside, it would be better to send the money out of his own diminishing supply and call at the shipping office to collect the remittance after he had taken the examination. This he did, little dreaming the trouble he was getting himself into, for when eventually he went to the shipping office, the clerk told him he could not have the money. "The officer Finch has run away from his ship," he said, "and gone to the gold diggings." "That's very inconvenient for me," exclaimed Hudson, taken aback. "I've already advanced the money to his wife. She'll have no means of repaying me, I know." "I'm sorry, very sorry indeed," said the clerk, but there was nothing he could do, of course, and Hudson departed. After the first shock, he was not unduly worried. After all, he thought, I am out to trust God to provide me with what I need as soon as my funds are exhausted. This only brings that time nearer. As he counted up his remaining money, he realised that the time was very near. The memory of his Drainside experiences encouraged him, however, and he returned to his attic feeling cheerfully confident that all would end well. During the evening, he made himself a notebook. It was cheaper than buying one. He selected some sheets of paper, fitted them together, and had started sewing them when he accidentally pricked the forefinger of his right hand. It was only a prick, and in a few seconds he had forgotten it. But that prick nearly cost him his life. The following day at the hospital, his work was to assist in dissecting the body of someone who had died of fever. It was not only an unpleasant job, but a dangerous one as well. The students had been solemnly warned that the slightest scratch in their hands, should it become infected, would probably prove fatal. And they all worked carefully, avoiding anything that might damage their skin. When Hudson soon began to feel inexplicably weary and then was suddenly sick, it did not occur to him that there was anything seriously wrong with him. He was merely surprised, since his diet was not the kind likely to cause bilious attacks. He drank a cold glass of water, felt a little better, and went to a lecture. His right arm began to ache so much that he could not write. The pain spread to his side, and he felt very ill. He could not go on like this. "I can't think what has come over me," he said to the surgeon in the dissecting room. "Why? What's the matter?" he inquired. Hudson tried to describe how he was feeling, and the surgeon, looking at him keenly, said, "What has happened is clear enough, I'm afraid. This is a case of malignant fever. You must have cut yourself while you were dissecting." "No, sir, I'm sure I didn't. I haven't got a scratch or a cut." "Well, you certainly must have had one," said the surgeon. "Let me look at your hand." While he was doing it, Hudson remembered the prick of the needle the night before. "Could it be that?" he asked. Yes, the surgeon thought it could. "You'd better get home as quickly as you can," he said gravely, "and put your affairs in order." He looked at the young medical student, from whom it was useless to try to disguise the gravity of the situation. "For," he said bluntly, "you are a dead man."